What's up guys, Asian here again with another Murkmire video, and today we're going to be looking over one of the Blackrose weapons. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the Destro staff. So Liko's already released a video about this a few days ago, and basically kind of took a look at the Blackrose staff, not necessarily for a single target DPS build, but more kind of a trash clearing build. So you'd be using this not necessarily in the mini trials where there is no trash or very little trash, but you might be using this, for example, in ad pulls between bosses in the Cragglorn trials, or maybe Hall's Fabrication or Maw, or you might be running it in something like DSA or even Blackrose itself. You know, 4-man content where there's a lot more trash that you might want to clear, and you might want to clear quickly. So DSA is a prime example of a place where there's a lot of trash, and the faster you clear it, the better your score is. So that was the kind of build Liko focused in on, and I was tempted. I wanted to do a build kind of looking at the potential of the Blackrose Prison Staff a while ago, but real life got in the way. I never really got a chance to record it. But now there's kind of a lull in my classwork and things like that, and I kind of have time now to kind of dig into some of the videos that I didn't quite have a chance to do early on. But the build Liko created was centered around the Magplar. So this particular one that I'm running is going to be centered more around the magicka sorcerer instead. Realistically, you can really use any class, but I personally believe that Magplar and Magsorks are probably going to be the best option when it comes to using the Destro staff here. In my opinion, I actually think that the Magsork might be actually a little bit better than the Magplar, because we will be focusing in on using lightning staves for the additional AoE damage, because again, this is more focused on clearing as much trash as we possibly can in the shortest amount of time. So just real quick going over the build. So in terms of gear, this is all pretty much going to be similar across any class that you really run like this sort of setup on. So we will be running the Blackrose Prison Staff. Actually, just let me go ahead and actually move where my camera is so you can actually see the whole list of effects here. So this is the Blackrose Destruction Staff. So it comes in a perfected version and an imperfect version. The perfected version has that additional 2-piece effect, so it has additional spell penetration. The imperfect version does not. The perfect version comes just from clearing vet. You don't have to do anything sort of special about it. It just, as long as you clear it on vet, regardless if you have vitality left or if you used any sigils, you will get the perfect staff. If you clear it on normal, I believe you just get the plain imperfect Blackrose set. So I believe the unique effect remains the same between imperfect and perfect. It's just that additional 2-piece spell penetration for the destruction staff, and there are other bonuses for the other weapons as well. So Blackrose is the 4th arena set that came out. So this affects the 4th ability in the line, or it should affect the 4th ability, but this kind of breaks tradition a little bit, because Impulse is actually the 5th ability in the Destruction Staff line. So the 2-piece reduces the cost of Impulse by 10%, and then Impulse places lingering elemental damage on your targets, dealing flame, shock, and ice damage over 8 seconds. Now this doesn't necessarily deal those 3 ticks each time it ticks. So just to kind of show you guys how it works, I do have comment numbers turned on so you'll be able to see exactly what happens here. But here we have Elemental Ring, which is the morph of Impulse that just basically allows you to place it on a target rather than centering it around you. Now if we use this on a target dummy like you see here, kind of see how the stat actually works, in that we only get basically a single 3 separate hits. We don't get 3 hits 3 times. So the first hit is the initial hit, and then you get the flame hit, and then you get the shock hit, and finally you have the ice hit. Now from what I've been able to tell, it counts as a dot as well as a direct damage hit. So it will proc things like Scathing Mage and Scoria. So you see there it did proc Scoria. and each of those 3 elemental hits does have a chance of proccing their respective elemental effects. So the shock hit can proc concussed, the flame hit can proc burning, and the ice hit can proc chilled. So Liko, in his video, took a look at using charged, spoke about using charged to kind of increase the amount of the chance of applying the status effects to each target. So you could decide to do that. However, for this particular build, I decided to go with sharpened, just because in trash you typically will not have a tank being able to apply the debuff like major breach on everything. Your tank might not necessarily be wearing Alkosh, or maybe their Alkosh doesn't hit everything in the group, so having that additional penetration makes it just a little bit easier to get to the penetration cap. Now, depending on your group, you might be able to actually hit very close to the penetration cap, so in those instances then you might want to swap sharpened out for something like precise, perhaps, or maybe Nernhoned, or you could even go charged like Liko recommends in his video. It's kind of up to you what you want to do with that there. The other important thing here is going to be the Maelstrom Lightning Staff here. You could go with the Inferno Staff. It's kind of up to you which one you want to go for. But because Sorks have additional shock damage, I decided to go with the Lightning Staff instead. And obviously that's because our light and heavy attacks deal additional damage when we have our blockade up. So with all of our all of the enemies getting hit by blockade, we do have a pretty nice buff to our heavy attacks with the Maelstrom Lightning Staff while we're on our Blackrose bar here. In terms of the other armor pieces that we have here, we're running Scoria here. So in terms of monster helms, you do have several options here. So this particular build that I have is kind of centered around being able to play at range. You're still being far enough away that you can be at range if you would like. However, if you're able to play at melee range, then you could go with the Grothar set instead. So Grothar is by far probably the strongest monster helm set when you want just pure cleave damage, but it does rely on you being able to be within melee range. Another potential option would be Lambris, but Lambris does have a smaller radius of effect than Scoria, but it does have double procs. So you could use Lambris instead if you would like. If you decide to use a Maelstrom Inferno Staff, then I would actually recommend Lambris over Scoria, just because you have an increased chance of getting both procs active for Lambris, even though it doesn't have quite as large of an AoE effect compared to Scoria here. And then in terms of our 5-piece body set here, I'm running Sororia, but you could use different sets depending on the class that you're running, as well as if you are running like a Inferno Staff backbar for Maelstrom. Sororia is probably going to be the most consistent as long as you're able to maintain the buffs. However, Liko recommends using something like Scathing Mage. It's a particularly good set because each of the ticks that you get from the Blackrose Pulsar will actually have a chance of proccing Scathing Mage. So you can actually get pretty decent uptime with Scathing Mage using the Blackrose staff, but you don't have to run Scathing Mage if you don't like to. Other potential options might include just the tried and true Giuliano, so you could also go with something like Mother Sorrow if you'd like. So you have a lot of different options when it comes to body sets. I like Sororia though, just because when you do need to swap to your single target setup, you don't have to swap out your body set. And then finally, because we do have two unique weapons here, we have a 3-piece willpower instead. Because this is focusing in on cleave damage, we are going with Arcane instead of Bloodthirsty. You could realistically use Bloodthirsty, but I think Arcane is going to be a little bit stronger for AoE cleave damage. We do have 3 spell damage enchants here because we don't have to worry about sustain. We'll be heavy attacking a lot in this sort of rotation, basically. Now, in terms of our skills, this is going to vary depending on class. So for Sork specifically, I have Frags, Shock Ring. This is a pet build, so we have the Familiar, Endless Fury, Inner Lights, and the Destruction Staff Ultimate. And for our back bar, we have Haunting Curse, Liquid Lightning, the Familiar again, Blockade of Storms, Ellie Drain, and Greater Storm Atronach. Now, this is just so if we do need some single target stuff, we can kind of do a little bit of single target damage here. But if I was going for pure AoE damage, like I wasn't concerned about single target damage at all, I would actually just end up replacing a lot of these with Bound Aegis instead for the additional max magicka here. So this Ellie Drain would be where we put our shield, so you would still want the shield here, so I'd probably still put the shield here. but it's kind of up to you if you want to do that or not. So this is kind of what I would do if I wanted to completely maximize my AoE damage here. Put Bound Aegis on both bars for that additional magicka, or you can just put it on the front bar here, because this is the bar that we're going to be spending most of our time on. So in Liko's video, he did it on a Magplar, so he had a Blazing Spear and Solar Barrage instead. If you're going to do this on like a Mag Decay, you would be using Eruption instead, maybe Flames of Oblivion if you want to do that. Engulfing Flames as well for that additional flame damage debuff. Mag Decay is actually, this would be really nice on a Mag Decay. Just for the additional flame debuff. Of course, you will have to use the lightning staff on one bar, but you would be able to have the inferno on another bar instead. If you're running the warden, then you would have Winter's Revenge as your class ability. Fetcher Infection is a single target ability, unfortunately, and the other morph is not very useful for single targets, so you wouldn't really be using that morph, Fetcher Infection. So your only real cleave damage there would probably just be Winter's Revenge. In terms of Nightblade, you have Twisting Path as an additional, so basically a second blockade. But that's the only additional cleave damage class ability that you have as a Nightblade there. You could also run the bow proc, but that's more single target. You can't bow proc 5 enemies all at once. But that's another option there. So that's pretty much, I think that pretty much covers all the different classes, unless I'm missing one. Nope, that's all of them. So, like I said, each class can run this build, but in my opinion, I believe that Sorcs and Templars are probably going to be the best option here. I'm just going to move my webcam back to the other side now that we're done with equipment stuff. Now, in terms of CP, just because you're focusing on AoE damage doesn't mean that you need to change CP at all. You could argue that, oh, you might as well put more points in the Thaumaturge if you'd like, but don't forget that in trials, remember this is a PvE setup here, so even if in dungeons and 4-man content in trials, you have the bosses, and in those instances you want to focus in on single target DPS. So it will become very costly for you to swap CPs every single time you swap between bosses and trash. So in my opinion, just stick with your typical single target CP setup. So like what I have here, 61 Elfborn, 64 Ellie Expert, 26 Spell Erosion, 9 Staff Expert, 66 Master at Arms, 44 Thaumaturge. And that's just because that saves you some money. You don't have to swap CPs around every time you go up against the boss. And single target damage is arguably more important than AoE damage in trial scenario, because it's the bosses that you really want to kill. While trash, it is important to kill trash quickly. That's not really the main focus of a trial. It's really just burning down the bosses as quickly as you can. So just to kind of show you guys the potential of the Blackrose set, we're going to basically be testing things out on these 9 skeleton target dummies here. Unfortunately, they will not all die at the same time. That's just the nature of AoE cleave damage, or whichever one you're targeting with your heavy attack is going to die first. So we're basically going to be doing this until that first dummy dies, and then we'll back off and check our count metrics report for our total DPS overall. Just got to summon our pet here. So the rotation itself is actually quite simple. It's basically because the Pulsar has an 8-second duration and Blockade has an 8-second duration, it's a 8-second long rotation. So for Sorcs, it's going to be Liquid Lightning, Blockade, and then you do your Pet Pulse, and then followed by your Pulsar. And that's pretty much the entire rotation. Then you do 2 heavy attacks and you rinse, lather, and repeat. So for Liko's video, when he did the Magplar, he did Blazing Spear, Blockade, swap to the front bar, did Solar Barrage, Pulsar, 2 heavy attacks. So that's pretty much exactly, this is basically the Sorc equivalent of that rotation. You basically have time for 3 abilities plus Pulsar and then 2 heavy attacks. Obviously, this rotation is going to change depending on the specific class that you're running. So, for example, if you were doing this on a Warden, you would be doing Winter's Revenge, then Blockade, and then Pulsar, or because you don't really have another AoE class ability that you can use. And then you would do 2 heavy attacks. So that's kind of how it would play out. For Nightblades, it would be something like Path, Blockade, and then Pulsar, and then 2 heavy attacks again. So that's kind of how it would play out on these different classes. So let's go ahead and show you guys just how much DPS group, AoE DPS you can actually pull with the Blackrose set here. heavy attacks. So unfortunately, I do have common metric set up to only show single target DPS, so you will only be seeing the single target DPS and not necessarily the AoE DPS on that counter there in the left-hand corner. And you can see here that Scoria is kind of proccing randomly. It's not really proccing, you know, in the center of the mask here, just proccing on whatever it happens to proc on first. Again, very easy rotation here, and you can just kind of see. I think the single target DPS, it's actually not terrible. Remember, we don't have major breach at all. Don't have any other sources of you know, penetration, additional penetration at all. And we're hitting around 29k single target DPS, so it's actually not that bad in terms of single target DPS. Alright, so we'll just let our dots run out and then pull our pet out of combat here to let the damage reset. Alright, we can pull our pet back. So you can see Sorority is pretty much up all the time, even though we had a lot of AoE effects going on. That's just because the heavy attack counts as a single target, and then the pulsar also counts as single target. Well, pulsar counts as direct damage, I should say. So you can see here we're pulling almost 200k AoE DPS. I believe Liko was pulling around 240 when he had Style Anima give him guard. So that's something you want to keep in mind here. You know, if we were running something like Trap or Challenge Acceleration for additional amount of force, that increase your DPS even more. If we have something like a tank running Alkosh and it managed to proc Alkosh on this entire group, we did increase our DPS even more. So this just kind of shows you the AoE potential of Blackrose. Now, does this basically translate into something like single target DPS? Not really. So if you guys saw single target DPS here, you know, we topped out at about 30k DPS. So clear, you know, it's not bad for single target DPS, you know, for basically 4 buttons and then 2 heavy attacks. It's not that bad, but obviously if you invested time into mastering a light attack rotation, you would be able to pull higher single target DPS. So the Blackrose staff here, not necessarily great for single target, but if you're looking for a trash clearing monster, then it is a very nice set for you to use here. So you can basically see on this on our DPS report that Liquid Lightning, Blockade of Storms, #1's contributors. This Trifocus is actually the effect from the Trifocus passive. So basically the additional cleave from our lightning heavy attacks. And we have our Destro ulti here. We have our familiar pulse, and then shock ring, that is our impulse, and then we have Wild Impulse here. If we combine all of these together, it makes up 6% of our DPS, so that comes in right above Shock Ring there. And then you can see we have a couple of procs of Concussion, a couple of procs of Chills, a couple of procs of Burning here. So overall, if you want just pure AoE damage, I would consider picking up a Blackrose staff. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys found this video informative. Let me know down in the comments whether you guys are going to be running Blackrose Prison for the staff or not. I'm definitely going to try to pick up one of these staves just in case I ever do need to, you know, make a 200k AoE clearing machine for, you know, 4-man dungeons or trying to go for score in DSA. But that's just me, so I kind of want to know if you guys think this staff is actually worth running Blackrose Prison for. That's it for this video. Hope you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.